I'm Brian Webb here with Trenton Hooker. You can't say that we don't cover everything on this show. We've been to space, we've been to Payson, and now we're going to go to Dallas 1963.
Yes.
And what happened after with an expert on the JFK assassination.
Really excited about having this guest join us. Jefferson Morley, an investigative journalist who has been on this story for so long and one of the foremost experts in the country about it. Jefferson, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm very good. I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you so much. Well, hey, I know that you had a press conference this week on some new findings that were released in the assassination, but can we get in just a little bit of what were the big takeaways this week for our audience?
What surfaced this week was some travel records of a man named Bill Harvey, who was the chief of the CIA's assassination program in 1963, and who was bitter enemies with John and Robert Kennedy. And JFK researchers had always been interested in him because a CIA colleague of his said that they had seen him on a plane going to Dallas in November 1963. At the time, this man, Bill Harvey, was supposed to be the chief of the CIA station in Rome. So why was he traveling in the United States and why was he going to Dallas? And his colleague said, I always wondered why Bill Harvey was in Dallas. Well, the records that our reporter found and published last week show that Harvey secretly obtained a credential to travel within the United States in late 1963. It doesn't prove that he went to Dallas, but it proves that he wanted the ability to travel covertly inside the United States at a time when he had no reason to be here. So given his hostility to the Kennedy brothers, this is a significant story. And we have a follow-up story coming too, which is, so how did he get this credential? He seems to have had a very high-level source within Kennedy's government at the FAA who was helping him. We don't know that he was helping him wittingly. And again, we don't know that Bill Harvey went to Dallas. But this shows that suspicions about his travel plans in 1963 and his intentions towards President Kennedy is an open question.
And I was going to say, CIA guys getting code names, that's probably par for the course, right, if you're good at what you do. And also, Mr. Morley, if you don't mind, you said, can you talk to us about why he hated the Kennedy brothers? And also, I'm reading the notes here that he was head of the CIA's assassination program.
Yes, that's why he's significant. The assassination program was called ZR Rifle, and it was started in 1960 with plans of assassinating Fidel Castro in Cuba primarily, but the CIA wanted the capacity to assassinate other foreign leaders. Bill Harvey hated President Kennedy for two reasons. Like a lot of people in the CIA, he felt that the president had abandoned the CIA-trained brigade that was seeking to overthrow Castro in 1961 and was ignominiously defeated. The CIA was humiliated, and senior CIA officers like Harvey blamed the president. They felt he'd chickened out. Then, a year and a half later, Kennedy negotiates a peaceful settlement to the Cuban Missile Crisis at a time when the CIA and the Pentagon, most of the leaders of the CIA and the Pentagon, wanted to invade. And so they felt the common feeling was Kennedy had chickened out again. And in fact, the reason Bill Harvey was sent to Rome was because he got into a screaming match with Robert Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis and cursed him out in a White House meeting. After that, John and Robert Kennedy told the CIA, get rid of this guy. We never want to see him again. So they transferred him to Rome, supposedly. But now we know he didn't stay in Rome. He came back to the United States and was traveling secretly. It's a significant development because this was a suspicious character. And these new documents that we have found that were just declassified by President Trump earlier this year are significant new documents that tell us, that make his actions even more suspicious than they were.
Wow. So if we could back up just a moment to talk about a little bit with what Brian was speaking about with the feeling in the temperature in the White House, where you had the Kennedy brothers, but then you had the establishment intelligence agency run by Allen Dulles and the Dulles brothers. And then I know last time we spoke with you, we were talking about the revelations that came out about the operation chief, James Jesus Angleton, and some of the ties that were there. But can you explain to just the feeling and I guess the precedent that all of them were setting, where they were kind of a government within a government, of calling their own shots doing what they wanted?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up. So we have Bill Harvey, chief of the assassination program, seeking to travel secretly in the United States in defiance of the White House. That's clear. His very good friend, James Angleton, is the chief of counterintelligence at the CIA, also handles assassination operations, and his actions are almost completely invisible, even to the rest of the CIA. Angleton's counterintelligence staff was sort of a CIA within the CIA. So these guys had tremendous autonomy. There was no congressional oversight like we have now, who operated by themselves. And another thing that we learned about Angleton earlier this year in another document that just came out, thanks to Representative Anna Paulina Luna, was a file of a Cuban hitman named Herminio Diaz. And it turns out Angleton was vetting assassins to kill Castro in the fall of 1963. So again, you have this off the books type activities that were never known until now. We knew Angleton was friends with Harvey. We didn't know that he was vetting assassins. We only learned that this year. So what's coming out of the new JFK files is an unprecedented look at what you aptly call, a government within a government.
And Jefferson, so it's kind of, if I'm hearing you right, the CIA was chomping at the bit for an assassination in Cuba. Kennedy backed out, so they just kind of rechanneled their efforts back toward Kennedy because they were so mad. Is it that simple?
I wouldn't assert that as historical truth, but that's one scenario that explains the new evidence much better than the old lone gunman theory. And these new records, right? When these new records come out, it's not that we find out, oh, there's less reason to be suspicious. With both Harvey and Angleton this year, we found out there's more reason to be suspicious.
How far are we from the smoking gun that it was more than Lee Harvey Oswald? I mean, does this get us, well, like you just said, it's more suspicion, but are we still many, many steps from that conclusion?
Well, first of all, I don't like the whole trope of the smoking gun. It's kind of a Hollywood conceit where you produce the miracle piece of evidence.
Yeah.
Investigative reporters don't work that way. We don't go out looking for a smoking gun. We go out looking for a fact pattern and see if we can fill it out in a way that makes sense. And the fact pattern that's emerged in the past couple of years is completely incompatible with the lone gunman story. The lone gunman story was never particularly credible, and it's even less credible now. So what's the better explanation? I think we're getting closer to one, and that is that, the president was ambushed by enemies in his own government. And if people say, oh, that's a CIA done conspiracy theory, there's no proof of that. Look, a lot of people thought that privately at the time, okay? President Harry Truman thought that, which is why he called for the abolition of the CIA a month after Kennedy was killed. President Johnson didn't believe the lone gunman story that his own commission created, and Fidel Castro, Charles de Gaulle, John Kerry, Joe Califano, all these political insiders, they did not believe the official story. And what the emerging evidence shows is they had good reason not to believe it.
Real quick, going back to Bill Harvey, sure. And you were talking about the revelation that came out that he was traveling in the United States. One of the things with reading the latest facts that came out, the role of the FAA in helping him do that. Can you speak on that part? Who was head of FAA at the time, and what did they? That's
what was really interesting about the story, was because the FAA has never been implicated in the JFK story before. It was only when a redaction came off of a CIA document earlier this year that we realized the FAA had been used in creating these cover arrangements for Harvey. So not only was another government agency involved, but It came from the very highest levels of the FAA. Harvey was working to keep to hide his tracks, and he was relying on very high level contacts in the government who had CIA contacts or intelligence contacts to do so. So what we see is something that we might have suspected or guessed or speculated about before has been confirmed. Bill Harvey was traveling covertly in the United States in defiance of the White House with high-level help in late 1963. So no, this is not a smoking gun. Let me emphasize that. But it's part of a fact pattern that tells us we're getting closer to a better explanation of who killed President Kennedy.
And Jefferson, big picture here.
Yeah.
Why not just tell if it was an inside job? I am assuming you would want to keep that secret because that would tear the fabric of this entire government apart if that came out.
I think the justification up till President Trump until this year has been, you have no right to see this information, right? It's national security information and you have no right to it. That was what President Biden and the CIA decided in 2023. And the CIA intended this story to be kept secret forever. Now with Director Ratcliffe, we have a different attitude. Ratcliffe has been much more accommodating to requests from Representative Luna and the House Task Force on Declassification of Secrets to provide records. And he said he has conveyed to me and others, through channels, not personally, that we're not invested in the past. And if you have, legitimate requests for records of historical interest, we'll make them public. So I think that new attitude is very hopeful. I think that the reason the CIA has been hiding this all this time is it would be incredibly damaging to them. And, people say, well, everybody must be dead. Yeah, that's true. But you have to think in terms of Washington politics today. If there's embarrassing revelations about the CIA, somebody from the CIA can get called up to Capitol Hill and have to explain in public. It'd be embarrassing. They might say, we're going to cut your budget. President Trump and the CIA historically have been at odds, especially in Trump's first term.
The pressure still to this day on the White House with the Biden administration and then the first Trump administration. Can you talk a little bit about the differences there? But at the time, it was Mike Pompeo running the CIA, with asking the Trump administration to kind of push back on that. And then you had mentioned too, with the difference today with John Radcliffe in the CIA and the executive orders from the second term.
The backstory is really interesting. All of these documents that came out this year under Trump's order were supposed to be released in October 2017, according to law. The law was the JFK Records Act, passed in 1992, which said the government had to produce all of its JFK files and make them public within 25 years. After 25 years, which was October 2017, Mike Pompeo was Trump's head of the CIA. He came to Trump and said, there's all these documents, we couldn't possibly release them. And Trump went along with that. He didn't care. He didn't know much about JFK records. He'd spouted some conspiracy theories. He'd spouted some non-conspiracy theories. Didn't seem to be important to him. Whatever Pompeo wanted, Pompeo got, and Pompeo wanted 4 more years of secrecy. So he got it. Trump just said, he kicked the can down the road. He said, we'll revisit these documents in 4 years. So that led to October 2021. Well, by then, Biden was president. And the question came to Biden. We've got these thousands of JFK records left. A lot of records have been released, to be sure, but there's this small body, relatively small, several 10,000 compared to several 100,000 records. And it came to Biden, and Biden went along with the CIA. He's a kind of institutionalist type of guy. The CIA said, we want to keep this stuff secret for indefinitely. And Biden said, that's fine, go ahead. And so Biden ratified that deal with the CIA in 2023, and he issued an order basically washing his hands of the whole matter, saying this was his final order and the CIA would decide from then on. Well, at that point, there were several thousand documents left to be released, or portions of several thousand documents to be released. And the CIA's plan was, with Biden's approval, we're going to keep this secret forever. Well, what happened when the 2024 election came around, Trump was kind of embarrassed by what happened the first time around because some of his closest supporters were calling him on it. Tucker Carlson, Andrew Napolitano, Roger Stone, and they were saying, why didn't you release these records when you had the chance, And Trump, mouthed a bunch of excuses, and he didn't really have very good explanation. And so when Robert Kennedy came along and made releasing JFK records part of his Democratic presidential campaign, and then when he dropped out and he went over to President Trump, when Robert Kennedy did that in August of 2024, that's when Trump got back on board and said, I'm going to release those records if I get back in. He was trying to make up for some of his embarrassment. And he had Robert Kennedy there, who was from the family, and gave that call a lot of credibility. And Trump realized this was a good issue for him. He, in his last, in that final round, the home stretch of the campaign, he goes on Joe Rogan and he makes a big point of repeating, I'm going to release all the JFK records. So Trump really put himself out there because he wanted to make up for his embarrassment that he didn't do it the first time around. And so that's what led to Trump's change of position and led to his executive order early on in the administration, release all of the JFK files, period. And so all of those things that the CIA wanted to keep public and had Biden's approval to keep public, those things are now coming onto the record. And these are the things that the CIA wanted to hang on to the longest. So some of these are the most sensitive secrets in the JFK files.
Well, Jefferson, let me ask you.
Going through all of them. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, sorry to interrupt you, but let me ask you this then: if there is the few pages that really spell this out, why doesn't someone just hand those over to Trump or somebody else so we can, instead of getting the death by 1,000 cuts with these little guys like Bill Harvey, and then there's going to be another guy, and there's going to be another guy. Why can't we just have the dirt, the meat? Let's get right to it.
Well, because of what's called plausible deniability and compartmentalization of CIA operations. And so it's easy to say to the CIA, just go do it. But I mean, in fact, what they're doing is the only way to do it, which is bulk declassification, because the CIA itself, there's nobody at the CIA who knows what was going on in 1963. There may be a handful of people in the operations directorate who have access to the records and can figure it out. But the answer to your question is, it's not like all the documents are in one place. There's no place where somebody said, okay, here's how we're going to kill the president. This guy's going to do this. This guy's going to do that. Of course, a covert operation is designed to be secret from conception to eternity. So these guys, when they're working out covert operations, every step of the way, every single thing they do has plausible deniability built into it. That is the ability of the government to say, we had nothing to do with that, what happened. So looking for the smoking gun or the key pieces of evidence or all the pictures of the people who are involved, it's not a simple task, even if, as we apparently now have, a CIA that wants to be cooperative. So I think that's the answer to your question is it's harder than you think to get the answer. I
believe that. Can I ask you this? All your thoughts, all your research, all your study, do you think Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone? Are you willing to go there?
No, it's virtually certain now that that's not what happened. Lee Harvey Oswald might have been firing a gun, but he was not the intellectual author of Kennedy's death. Something else was going on probably involving high-level people within Kennedy's administration.
One thing I wanted to ask you on that point, just to piggyback off of, but Congresswoman Luna did send a letter to NBC News Network about an unseen tape that supposedly shows Lee Harvey Oswald on the ground nowhere near when the assassination took place. Is there any truth to that?
It's partially true. So let me tell you what it is. There's a piece of footage that was taken by an NBC cameraman who was riding in the motorcade behind the president's car. So he's filming the crowd and the scene. And then when the shooting takes place and the president's car takes off to the hospital because the president and Governor Connolly have been wounded, the press car follows and he's filming. And so they go around the corner in Dealey Plaza and they go by the Texas School Book Depository. And you can see this footage on YouTube. It's part of the NBC coverage that day, and it was taken by a photographer named Wegman. So he's filming a movie camera in the motorcade, and they broadcast the film later that day. So when you look at the film that appears on NBC, and I assisted Representative Luna's staff in examining some material sent from NBC, it's just too blurry. You can't tell who that is. Now, there's people who make the case that Oswald is there in the shadows of the first floor of the Texas School Book Depository when the motorcade went past. So obviously he couldn't have been on the 6th floor firing a gun if that's Oswald in the shadows. So to resolve the question, Oliver Stone, a movie maker and an expert in celluloid, said, let's get the original celluloid from Wegman's camera, not the copy that was broadcast on November 22nd, but the original celluloid. That's what Luna asked the NBC for. NBC came back and said, we can't find it. We only have the footage that aired, which is just too blurry to make a determination. So, you know, is NBC lying? I presume they are not. There are many cases in the JFK story of people stealing valuable or interesting film for their own purposes. So that might have happened. So the question is hard to resolve, and the film is not yet available, so we can't resolve it.
Can I ask about Lee Harvey Oswald? What you know of him? Does it make sense that he was involved and connected to these nefarious characters, whether it be CIA or beyond?
Oswald is a puzzle, and I don't think that he was the person who shot the president, but he definitely was involved, and he's acting like a guilty party that day. You know, he denied stoutly and repeatedly that he had killed the president, and said that he was a patsy for others, which implies somebody else did it and is trying to blame it on him. So he never got a chance to explain what he meant by that because he was executed by Jack Ruby on national TV. So, but here's the thing to understand about Oswald, and this is also new. This is a part of the new fact pattern that we have. The Warren Commission was told, and the American public were told, this guy Oswald came out of nowhere and he shot the president, and there was nothing anybody could do because there was no sign of it. Right? That story is utterly and completely false, we now know. James Angleton, who I referred to before, the chief of counterintelligence, had been collecting and monitoring Oswald's movements for 4 years by November 1963. And in those 4 years, Angleton had collected at least 42 different documents on Oswald, 13 FBI reports, 12 State Department reports, 11 different CIA memoranda. They were reading Oswald's mail. So the idea that Oswald was a lone nut, I mean, that in it, the Oswald file, the pre-assassination Oswald file, basically refutes that by itself. He was not lone in the sense that he was unobserved by the CIA. He was monitored constantly by the CIA from 1959 to 1963. So he's involved in these events somehow, but denies that he was. But the CIA had great insight into who Oswald was long before he was arrested for killing President Kennedy. That's for sure.
Jefferson, we just have about a minute left. If you could tell the folks at home how they can find your work and your team's work and what you're working on next.
Yeah, so you can find us JFK Facts on Substack, jfkfacts.substack.com. You can get a free subscription and get a lot of the content. You get a paid subscription and you get the really hard-hitting reporting of the types I'm talking about and the type that we are going to be doing in the coming months. So, you know, we are looking at all these new records, not with the notion of proving a conspiracy theory or disproving a conspiracy theory. We're looking to fill out the pattern of what actually happened, and we're getting closer and closer.
Will we ever have an answer in my lifetime?
You know, I think it's quite possible. Okay. I mean, I think we could have a totally different picture in a year. It might take 10 years.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
And let the reporting speak for itself. That's all we can do. So thank you, Jefferson.
Yes.
Really appreciate it.
Your time.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for these good questions.
Good stuff,
Yes, sir.